All right, YouTube, what I predicted months ago has now come true. A federal judge has issued a statement that the NSA surveillance of phone metadata and so forth is probably, I guess, maybe unconstitutional. Of course, there have been other lawsuits before put before federal judges on the NSA spying, and what held them back mostly is that plaintiffs were essentially told they didn't have standing to bring the case because they couldn't prove that they themselves had actually had surveillance conducted on them. Let alone the fact that the government is clearly conducting surveillance on the entire population, let alone that clearly it is unconstitutional. Anyone with a working brain understands this. You can make whatever shill excuses you want about, well, it's keeping us safe. It's still unconstitutional. That much is fairly clear. We'll go through here and read part of this. This is from the USA Today article, but it's on all the other sites now too. You can look for this as probably front page news later today and tomorrow. I'm sure it's going to be popping up everywhere, and people are going to be up in arms towards people like Bush and Obama, who oversee these programs and seem to think there's no problem with them. A federal judge ruled Monday that the National Security Agency's controversial surveillance program that collects millions of Americans' telephone records may be unconstitutional. I'd throw in that it is, not maybe, but he probably chose that word specifically. U.S. District Judge Richard Leon ruled in a lawsuit brought by conservative activist Larry Klayman that the legal challenge to the massive surveillance program disclosed in full earlier this year by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden would likely succeed. Essentially, this lawsuit is bringing forth purely a constitutionalist argument. That is, that this program itself, in structure and use, violates the Fourth Amendment, rather than going after the government on the basis that I'm not comfortable with the surveillance and the surveillance itself is wrong. They're going after the whole program on a constitutional basis. This is different from the tactics that others have used. Interestingly, this judge was appointed by Bush. Bush is the one that oversaw the expansion of the NSA to its current form. It does predate Obama. Although Obama has sat by and repeatedly defended this program, when he got elected partially by saying, well, I'll roll back all this surveillance and stuff. I believe it says down here, but I'm not sure, talking about the bulk collection being likely unlawful. Clearly it is, and it points out that other people have gone after the FISA courts unsuccessfully because the government keeps throwing them out, which is ridiculous, but that's the way you have to play by the rules when you're dealing with the Supreme Court and so forth. Third case denied last month by the Supreme Court was brought directly there by the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC. While the target in other cases is the government, EPIC went after the top secret FISA courts that authorized the surveillance of Verizon phone records under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Of course, that one didn't work, and the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that it wasn't, that they didn't have standing to do so. I'm not sure if this particular judge is also issuing a ruling on email collection. It looks like they're looking primarily at metadata, but that's the major scope of this program. And it also pointed out, not in this article, but I believe it was the Fox News one, that the same judge said the government has not given one example, one specific example, in which this program or any related program overseen by the NSA has stopped even one impending terrorist attack. I pointed that out months ago as well. I said, first you had Boehner come out when Snowden's leaks first emerged, and he said, well, to my knowledge, it stopped 2 imminent terrorist attacks. Then Pelosi came out and she said, oh, well, to my knowledge, it stopped 6 attacks. And then Jay Carney came out and said, well, it stopped at least 50 attacks. And then a few months later, one of these departments or the NSA head or someone said, oh, it stopped like 200 attacks. I hate to break this to folks that don't understand this. Terrorism didn't get invented after 9/11. What we term terrorism, well, the term terrorism started being used around that time in the wide dialogue of society. what we would consider now to be terrorist attacks of foreign groups, some domestic groups too, bombing things, driving trucks through, windows and gunning people down, toppling, various buildings with airplanes or whatever. It's been around for a long time. Islamic terrorism, which started the whole debate, has been around for decades because we were already muddying our feet in the Middle East, in Iran, in the 1950s, and in Iraq in the 1960s, and in Afghanistan in the 1980s. The World Trade Center had already been bombed long before 9/11 happened. People don't seem to understand this. And yet, we never used this type of surveillance, and these attacks were very, very rare. It is insane to think that this program has stopped 200 impending terrorist attacks. Tally up all of the credible possible attacks and all of the actual recognized terrorist attacks from the decades prior. It doesn't add up to 200. We don't get a terrorist attack every week in this country. It doesn't make sense. It's complete and utter nonsense to think that the NSA, in the time that it has been collecting this metadata, has stopped that many attacks, especially when you understand these groups, militants, foreign governments that don't like us, whatever, they are not stupid enough to post about jihad or any other warfare tactic on Facebook. They don't use regular cell phones to discuss the issues. They probably don't even use the internet to discuss any form of these issues, no matter how secure they think it is. They don't use some private email or public email. Osama bin Laden didn't order his people around using Yahoo Mail. It doesn't happen. These people may be not quite all there. They may have lost some of their marbles, but they're not that dumb. Look, Boston bombing, again, as I mentioned months ago, is the perfect example. The older brother anyway, was posting openly about his jihadi sentiments on Facebook on a regular basis. He was flagged for surveillance by the Russians. They told the FBI years before it happened that this person was a jihadist, an extremist, and a threat. He was going to mosques where he actually got thrown out of the mosque for being too extreme. And yet they didn't stop him. He wasn't being followed. Apparently there was no surveillance whatsoever conducted on him. Whatever programs the NSA is using to monitor this metadata, and to monitor emails, and to monitor World of Warcraft, of all things, and to monitor everything else that goes on in an electronic form. They're probably going through your mail, too. Let's face it, they probably got agents in every post office by now. Whatever they are doing is not working. It did not stop the Boston bombings, which should have been the easiest terrorist attack, so-called, to stop, because they were openly posting it in public on Facebook. And it still happened. Nobody stopped it. So to say the NSA is effectual, is working properly, is efficient and not a waste of money is ludicrous. It is a waste of money because this blanket surveillance is not being properly used, and it's unconstitutional to begin with. So bravo to this federal judge for understanding what any reasonable person, any sane person would have already known. I'm surprised the Supreme Court should have been scratching their heads this entire time and begged somebody to take a case to them on the simple constitutional basis that it makes no sense, number one. It's a waste of time and money. It's not actually doing anything. Who knows? It hasn't even solved a single terrorist attack that we know of and have the specific details for. Number two, it is unconstitutional. It does violate the Fourth Amendment. Just read the Fourth Amendment. We protect people's mail from search for a reason. If they think that you're a crazed jihadist, like Tsarnaev was, ironically, if you've been flagged by the Russians and the FBI has already interviewed you, and you're posting about jihad on Facebook, nobody cares if they go through your mail, because you probably are a complete lunatic. The vast majority of the population is not made up of lunatics who talk about committing jihad on Facebook. It's not going to happen. And again, terrorist attacks happened before 9/11. They will have to happen into infinity. You're never going to get rid of all these different groups, mainly because the United States continues to fuck with other nations for no real apparent reason. It's like a big game to some of these groups. Of course, you also have this story about that CIA agent who was over in Iran, who nobody really knew what happened to him for years and years, and now it turns out, oh yeah, they were aware he was over there. He got captured by some militant group, or maybe the government of Iran. We're not exactly sure what's going up there. You'd think we'd have better intelligence about that too. If we can supposedly stop these uncultured, unintelligent, loosely organized terrorist groups and guerrilla fighters, if we're able to do that through NSA blanket surveillance, then you would think that we would be able to bug Iran to the point where we would know where this particular CIA asset is. Or maybe they do know where he is and they just don't give a shit because he knows too much and they figured they just let him rot in Iran or something. It's completely pointless what they're doing at the NSA. The NSA shouldn't even exist. It has no purpose that isn't already filled by local law enforcement. It serves no purpose. Before the Patriot Act, we were actually safer as a nation. All this surveillance and all this spying nonsense, if anything, is making us less safe. It's making people more paranoid. And then you've got the problem where the government pushes it too far and people think that they literally start to become violently paranoid instead of just having a few tinfoil hatters saying, yeah, the government's going to come at us with reptilians or something. Then you end up with the vast majority of the population waking up one morning, seeing the news and losing their minds. End up with some sort of chaos, anarchy in the streets situation. It could happen. They're making us less safe and pushing people towards that sort of paranoia. If the government is so worried about homegrown terrorist groups and constitutionalists, libertarians are going to take up arms and try to secede from the Union, if they're worried about this, then respect the Constitution. It's there for a reason. This federal judge understands that. This federal judge gets a round of applause for actually understanding the Constitution that all of these people are supposed to understand. It's sad that the general population seems not to understand it. Because if the general population understood what the Constitution meant, what its contents were, what it meant, why it was there, and how important it was, Obama and Bush and all of these other really bad presidents who have done things that are blatantly unconstitutional would have been impeached. Bush would have been impeached. He would have had a 0% approval rating. Obama would already be out of office if that were the case, if Americans really understood this issue and why it matters. That's the sad part. It's sad when you look at the Ukraine, and right now there are millions of people protesting because their government didn't sign a bill that had nothing to do with their particular liberties, and they're willing to take to the streets and protest, and yet here you have very, very little going on, despite the fact that the government is listening into everything you say on any electronic medium. This video, like all videos on YouTube, is probably archived somewhere in their Utah data facility. By the way, the same one that caught fire because they didn't. This is how inept they are. It caught fire several times. The servers overheated because they didn't set them up properly. They don't have a clue what they're doing. These people are a danger to themselves at this point. The NSA agents there obviously don't really know what they're doing with love int and the servers overheating and all this nonsense, and the Clapper continually lying to Congress. He should have been declared guilty of treason and shot by now. They should have already executed him for treason, high treason to the country, for lying to Congress, lying to the whole population, and blatantly violating the Constitution. He should have already been thrown in a dungeon somewhere in Gitmo. I just don't understand why the government persists in defending these programs. They're starting to even worry warmongers and surveillance-happy people like McCain. When McCain starts getting worried about the CIA, and when even somebody like Feinstein expresses concern that we're spying on our allies overseas, that's when you know that there's a problem. That's when you know that things have gone not a little too far, but quite a bit over that edge, and you're already in free fall mode. It makes no sense. These programs don't work. If they do work, let them cite specific examples. Let them give the time, the place, the names, the results. Are these people, have they been imprisoned? Are they in Gitmo? Where are they? What they have? If they're American citizens, they have the right to an open, fair trial too. What's come of these people also? Or are they just jailing random people because they made a joke about Osama on Facebook? That seems unfortunately more likely. Peace out.